You're listening to a podcast by Change My Relationship, featuring licensed marriage and family therapist and author Carla Downing. These podcasts are designed to provide you with practical solutions based on biblical truths for all your relationships. Today, Carla will be interviewing a guest who has experienced a relationship problem and successfully worked through it.
Welcome to Change My Relationship podcast. My favorite thing to do is to interview people who have dealt with a relationship challenge and overcome it. And I have here today a husband and wife, Greg and Edie, and I've known them for quite a few years. They've done testimonies in my classes for me. They've always been willing to come and share their story, hoping that it gives experience, strength, and hope to other people. And that is what we hope that this podcast will do today. So I would like to welcome Greg and Edie.
Thank you. Yes.
So we're going to be talking about their son's drug use and just kind of how it affected their family, how they dealt with it, and then the things that they've learned from their story. So go ahead and can you tell me about your son's childhood?
Yes. So we adopted our son at birth, and he was a charming young kid growing up, very, very active, ADHD, lots of energy, very gifted in athletics. And his schooling was a struggle for him because of his ADHD that he had. He also had dreams of becoming a firefighter or a Marine as a child. So he was a very active, challenging child from probably age 2 up. So.
And then what about his teen years and the start of his drug use? How did that come about?
So I'll throw in some thoughts on that. As we look back on our journey, we seem to note that probably in junior high would be when he began to experiment perhaps with some drugs, probably marijuana, that type of thing. But he was starting to choose some poor friends that kind of led him in a path that he had no trouble following, apparently. And then in his freshman year, we actually moved him to another school, hoping that he would have some new opportunities to restart with some issues. And then we discovered that there he made some other friends that maybe weren't such great influences. He continued to be very involved in sports. That was a great way for him to use his skills and his energy, but he ended up on his junior year definitely making a very intentional switch into a group of friends that were not healthy. And we began to see changes in his language. His respect at home was very poor. We began to even see things missing in the house, from a laptop to money to our Wii system. That's when we thought, okay, we have to do something pretty serious here. And that led us at age 17 to do an intervention where that was the hardest thing for me ever, was to do an intervention and have him sent away to an all-boys Christian school outside of California State, where they have more control of keeping them there. But to our disappointment, 2 days later, he and 2 other young boys from that program stole the vehicle and drove back to California. And that turned into a grand theft auto at 17. At that point, that really introduced us into the juvenile hall and lawyers, legal matters. What was the other? Community service was another aspect of that. It just became overwhelming.
So what was your marriage and family like before the start of the drug use? Because let's just go back to, was your family dysfunctional? Did you have marriage problems? What was the home like?
I'll answer that. We had a good, solid marriage. We were active members of our church. Our children were part of the church program, Sunday school every Sunday. We were involved with all of our children's sports activities, both of them in sports. And we would do fun vacations with our family. And I worked only 2 to 3 days a week at that time for the purpose of having a strong influence on our children. So I would say we had a fairly normal, and I'd say it's a pretty stable marriage.
Yeah, because I remember you guys talking about your story, and you really didn't have, and no family's perfect, but you did not have a dysfunctional family. You did not have marital problems that spilled over onto your children.
We also have been very committed to personal counseling for the purpose of enhancing who we are, our own self-improvement. That I think also contributed to just an active focus on having a good marriage.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that you both did separate counseling kind of periodically just for personal development from the time you were married, which I can't honestly say I've heard anybody else say that. So I was very impressed with that. What happened though when you started encountering the heavy drug use?
We initially felt something was wrong, right? Obviously. And maybe like similar to most parents, we tended to try to control the situation. So we would check up on him. We would try to address anything that was going on with him. And I would pop home and catch him in the middle of doing some things, running from school and using marijuana at that point, which of course we thought that was kind of minor at that time, but it turned out that was kind of the start of the whole thing.
Mhm. Yeah. And how did it impact your marriage?
Well, I I wanted to set boundaries and kind of parameters and kind of be more firm. And Edie was more wanting to rescue him. And we kind of progressed down that path.
And it's not uncommon for a couple to have one that is the more, we got to stop this and he's got to suffer consequences, and the other person to the other spouse to kind of be like, no, 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 he's hurting, he's having problems, we have to love him, we have to rescue him, we can't let bad things happen. And part of it is the dynamic that when one person is really strong and is showing the anger at what's going on, and he's got to suffer the consequences, we got to stop this, that the other person kind of swings, it's like a teeter-totter, you're up there with that anger and the strong, and then the other person is at the bottom going, no, 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 we can't be that hard. And it literally kind of can go back and forth like that. So that's pretty common. And I think that, Edie, didn't you talk about how you kind of became obsessed with trying
Yeah,
to fix him?
yes, I will own that. I became extremely obsessed with wanting to save our son. And I will say one thing that kind of influenced that was that I figured our son was adopted at birth, but he was adopted. And I figured there was certainly, probably, possibly an element of him feeling abandoned from that point. And then to think that we would kick him out, or that there had to be some major action to bring to an end how he was destroying our family, not just himself. But so I did become so obsessed. It's like all I could talk about was him and what we could do to save him. I cried a lot. I was distracted from focusing on my daughter and her needs, and my husband and his needs. He responded feeling kind of angry at the whole situation, and I was just like broken. And so that made it hard for us, but that's kind of what led us to figure out we need help.
Yes. And I think I believe you saying that you're having trouble doing your job because, and that is that obsession that you get, where that fear drives that obsession, anxiety about what's going on, and the behind the obsession is we have to fix this, but the way that goes when you come out of the fear is we have to make it better. We have to do what we need to do to help him. And then when you're feeling some more of the anger or the strength, then it can come out and no, we're going to set boundaries. We got to take care of this. But Greg, I think you got to the point where you were really frustrated with her obsessing about your son.
Yes. And yeah, it got to the point where we couldn't have a conversation without it being focused on him and what we were going to do to rescue him or save him or help him and that sort of thing. And so I kind of got to the point where it was like it was clear that Edie was really like constantly, no matter where we were or what we were doing, it was what's going on with him. And so finally I said, really, we need to, it's really either or him you're going to focus on, or it's our family, it's our daughter. And that kind of caused kind of a wake up call at that point.
Mm-hmm. That was a wake up call for me, that I was so broken that I had no energy and enthusiasm and motivation or creativity beyond working. I don't know how I functioned at work. I actually survived that. But beyond that, my capacity, my energy, and so on was very sucked out of me. And I absolutely knew that I was committed to my marriage, and I absolutely knew that I wanted to be committed to our daughter. And Greg, what he made clear to me was that what he wanted was for me to understand that our son was making the bad decisions. He was hurting our family terribly. And for he needed to go, and Greg needed him to go so that we, the ones who were making good decisions in life, weren't going to be poisoned and unable to function.
And we had gotten to the point we couldn't trust him
Mm-hmm.
around us at all. We felt violated. We had to put locks on our doors and inside the house to keep him out of certain rooms. So, I mean, it was pretty intense for several months or years.
Was it at that point that you asked him to leave the home?
Yes, it was at that point that when he said, you just can't live here anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, which must have been really scary for you, Edie.
Well, he called me at work one day, knowing that I was about to leave, and said, Edie, I just need to let you know. And I've just set the boundary. Told him his choices are so destructive that they're basically spilling on the rest of us, and he needed to protect the family. So he had him pack up some bags. And
So you just went along with that because you knew that was probably you probably knew partly that was the right thing to do, just didn't have the strength to do it yourself.
Well, at that point, when Greg had already said to me, Edie, it's either him or me, it was absolutely clear to me that I was committed to my marriage and to our daughter. And so when he told me that, I cried the whole way home, but in my heart, I knew that is what had to happen. And I accepted that his strength was what I needed. So I discovered kind of from then on that my role was to be a prayer warrior. And that I prayed incessantly, and I could count on Greg to do the hard job, which he was willing to do and had the strength to do.
Yeah. And that's where you can come together and be on the same page, which definitely took some of the stress. Although living with this and having this go on like this, the stress is unbelievable. I mean, you're trying to take your obsession off your son, but you're getting phone calls continually from him right after this point.
Oh, yes.
Wanting money and wanting help, and just his changes that he made as he was moving from one place to another. And I think you said one time that he called and asked for money for boots, for like a place to stay or something, or boots to get a job. I think this was years into it. And you spent the money on the boots and the uniform. And I think he was there for a day or two and then left the boots and the clothes in the hotel and took off. Am I remembering that correctly?
I think that's very possibly the case. He left bicycles behind. Yeah, lots of.
It was always I need a bicycle because I need to get to work. And then you get him a bicycle, and then, well, it got stolen. whatever, or
I'm moving on to something somewhere
I have
else.
nothing to eat. Can you buy me a pizza? And it never ended. The excuses, and we really didn't understand
Right.
what was going on at that point and what how to manage the situation really.
So you probably said yes to a lot of that.
We did a lot of it. In fact, most often we said yes.
That was actually one of the motivating factors, I think, of kicking our son out of the house was the financial damages that were occurring.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the things disappearing and stuff has to do with the stealing things and hawking them in order to get money to buy drugs because it's not cheap. So you have kind of like when you describe how many years did this go on between the leaving your let's just do he started, let's say started drugs in junior high, used all the way. Didn't he start heroin in high school?
I'm
It
not
was
sure.
like right after high school or probably late high school. We just didn't know that he was
Yeah.
doing, but definitely had the behavior for it.
I would say was when it got into harder drugs,
Hmm. Yeah.
including heroin.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and then I know that he went from place to place in terms of where he was living. I'm sure he was on friends' sofas. He didn't have a car, so he wasn't in his car. And he went in and out of treatment, right? And
Correct.
okay, and that was on your insurance?
Yes, in fact, he basically figured out how to use the insurance to get rehabs to send airplane tickets. So that was the beginning of him going to literally all over the United States. He would go into a rehab, stay for a while. Sometimes he'd complete it. Other times he wouldn't. He would walk out and go back on the street and into drugs. And he would just go back and forth. And really up until he was age 26, when that's kind of when the insurance company says, we're no longer going to cover you. And that road that of nice rehabs ended and people pursuing him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
And
So he had there were, I count 15 rehabs that he attended, and then probably up to 10 at least detoxes or sober living situations in that window between 2014 and 2020.
mm-hmm. Yes, and I'm sure each time that he went in, you had something to do with helping him do that. I've experienced that. I know how much emotional energy and goes into that and how much hopes you have, but how much anxiety you have thinking maybe it won't work. And there's a lot of work with getting them in there and paperwork and all that kind of stuff. So I think you said that he also moved how many times?
I recorded 127 moves he has done from 2014 to today.
Yeah, talk about instability. That is unbelievable. So, how did you go from that point and at what point did you reach out and try to get some help?
I believe attending your class when love hurts is the class that we attended together
Mhm.
and the class that really began to help us start taking care of ourselves and understanding addiction better, understanding how manipulated we could become. And that just lended us a lot of skills and insights to begin to take a little more control of our lives.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I remember you guys working really hard at the principles and applying them. And the way I titled that, the book is When Love Hurts, and the class is Transforming Difficult Relationships, just for people listening not to be confused. But I remember talking to you about letting go of the obsession and how you could really relate to that. And then I know that detaching with love, how did that help you?
Detaching with love was hard for me. But I dealt with that by always assuring him when we had come in contact with him of our love for him, and also assuring him that I was praying for him and that we wanted what was best for him, but that I had to start not taking any ownership of his choices, not feeling responsible for his choices. That was helpful for
Yeah.
me.
What about you, Greg?
Well, that was very helpful. And it was helpful to me that Edie attended several of your classes. Actually, it seemed to help her. So I participated as well. And then a friend told me also about Narnan during that time period. And I said, Edie, well, why don't we check this out too? And he wasn't real excited about it. So I said, well, I'll just attend that. And so I started going. I actually had a friend that I was meeting with that was participating, and he said, I'll go with you. And he said, I think I can help you. And so we started participating there. And I said, Edie, this I think will help us. And so then Edie started coming after that. And we continued to do that for 9 years. And then continued to come to your classes during that time period as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we found it was difficult because this affects a lot of different things in life, right? Because it's a never ending thing, right? You have church friends, you have different friends that can tolerate hearing the same story over and over again, because the story doesn't end just like everything. You say a few prayers and then they turn around and everything's fine. It's a struggle. It's a long-term issue. And some people can handle that and some people can't handle it, friends and support systems. So we needed Narnan, and it helped us because there were other people like us or just like us that had gone through it. And then we learned in your classes as well as there that there's more than one addict. We're addicted to the addict.
Yes, that's true. That's a good way to say it. We are.
And so, I mean, we need that for our own health, and we recognize that.
Yeah. Well, and when I talk about codependency, because the way that we react when we say we're addicted to the addict, could also be talked about. It's like co-addiction or codependency. And when I talk about codependency, I will say that you're codependent from childhood, or you can become codependent in a dysfunctional relationship. And that the example is you guys, because you had a healthy home, you had a healthy relationship, and then you had to deal all of a sudden with extreme addiction. And it literally threw you into some codependent behaviors and caused problems in your relationship. And it wasn't because you didn't know boundaries or you didn't know what a healthy relationship was or how to communicate. You just had this incredibly painful problem with somebody that you loved dearly to deal with. And you had to try to figure out, how do we handle this? And that's why the 12-step programs for families of addicts and alcoholics are so helpful, because that's where you find out how to apply the steps to yourself to deal with somebody else's addiction. Because without that, I think the preamble of Al-Anon, which is for families of alcoholics, Nar-Anon for families with drug addiction, talks about that without help, it's too much for most of us. We become irritable, angry, and we feel angry, we feel guilty, we are overcome with fear, and we need those 12 steps to go on that journey of trying to figure out how we can live when somebody that we love is making choices to continue in an addiction. And given the fact that your son was adopted, I don't know if you know anything about the bio family, his biological family. Do you now?
I had a lot of the records of the birth mother was 18 and had from what I could tell, a healthy pregnancy.
Good.
But I think that
Historically, there were
Yes.
drugs by her mother who was an addict.
Oh, okay. So her mom, the bio mom, was an addict, or the
well,
bio mom's mom, the grandmother, was an addict.
yes, and she was actually she was foster cared at a young age.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
But at the time of her pregnancy, during her pregnancy, there was
No drug use.
no.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then when you talk about ADHD, you talk about it's typical or common for people with ADHD to have a lot of high risk behaviors. So the incidence of drug use and even like the extreme of at 17 being in that program and stealing the van, I think you said, and driving all the way from like, was it Utah back to California with two other people with the van is it's a pretty high risk taking behavior. I mean, that's pretty gutsy and not everyone would be willing to do that. But the incidence of because I haven't heard you guys talk much about mental illness start other than the ADHD, really didn't have severe depression, anxiety, not really been diagnosed bipolar, or so it's probably highly likely what we know now about genetic addictive genes that I know that's really strong in my family and it's possible that that's where that drug addiction came from and we don't know that. I'm not saying for sure, but part of that is helpful. It's helpful because recognizing that if you have a genetic predisposition and you have risk-taking behaviors with ADHD, doesn't mean you excuse it, but we can have compassion. And it's not like he was just out to ruin his life, to ruin your lives, or because he was angry and resentful. It's because he truly struggled with addiction. And about 50% of my family, the family I grew up with, and also grandparents and parents, my dad was an alcoholic, and about 50% of the offspring within 2 generations has genetic addiction issues. It's really strong.
Wow.
Wow.
Really strong. So I mean, it's possible that was had something to do with it. So
Sure.
detachments really helps because you let them deal with their own consequences. But I think I remember Edie saying that boundaries was always a struggle for her to say no, and that she would hand you the phone, Greg,
Yes.
and say, you say it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just add one thing back to boundaries. I'll never forget in your class when you said that Jesus had boundaries
Mhm.
and you explained how those boundaries worked. That was like very eye-opening to me in terms of of Jesus can set boundaries, we can set boundaries, or we should set boundaries.
Exactly.
Healthy. Yeah.
Mhm.
So yes, I would be the one to say no if there was something that was unreasonable. It many times it was a judgment call. Sometimes I would do the right thing, and sometimes I wouldn't do the right thing, depending upon the situation.
I will add one area where I just really was thankful for Greg and appreciative of his strength was I would say literally 1,000 times, I'm sure our son would call and say, can I just come home?
Mm.
And I need to come home, or if I come home, this and this, and he has all his reasons why it's going to be okay and it's going to work. Or he just needed that to just the next step. And Greg, I'm sure it was hard, but he would get on the phone and say, son, we love you. We will always love you, but that is not one of the options. And that became almost like a phrase, I think, that you just had to repeat. But we always assured him that we loved him and that we always would. And he would say today that he believes he is alive today because of our our faithful prayers. He believes he would not be alive otherwise if it hadn't been for our faithful prayers, and we always kept in touch.
Yeah. So did you keep him for his cell phone so that he could call you?
We did not keep him a cell phone, I don't think.
He was on a cell phone. I think he had a cell phone throughout the time, and then
Yes.
he'd lose them and that sort of thing. But yes,
I don't remember that, Bob.
yeah.
I know. Me too. I'm remembering a lot of what you guys have said, though.
You're doing a good job. Yes.
I can't say I remember every detail about my own life as much, but yeah. So, and just for the sake of people listening, what is the reason for telling your child no when they call in desperation, asking for money for food or for a place to stay or whatever? Why? Why would you say no?
I would say no because it's the type of thing where it's enabling really his behavior. It's kind of like he would, I'm sure, use that money to buy drugs,
Yeah.
basically. And we kind of put two and two together. Send me this amount of money, and it was on a regular basis, and it was always some reason. But when your eyes finally open up and realize that he's just using this for drugs,
And we're supporting it.
and we're supporting it, which is a scary thought. And the other thing is, we recognize that we were making his life easier.
Yeah.
Basically, I've heard the term where it's kind of like when they fall, you throw a mattress under them so that they fall on the mattress when they really need to fall and hit their bottom, right? And so that they recognize that it's their responsibility. So we were. It's a struggle between setting boundaries and enabling back and forth.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And then I know that his journey was pretty severe, going that many different places, meaning he was moving around, didn't have money, went to rehabs, and I know there were sober livings on top of that. But he also had, I think, a girlfriend, right? Overdose, and a couple of friends overdose, which is a wake-up call.
He had a fiance actually who passed away. That was very traumatic for him. And then later on, he had a girlfriend who OD'd and passed away. That was towards the end of his rehab story, but the greatest point that he really hit his rock bottom was when we said no to a rehab that was costly, and said, you're left now to go to whatever the state will offer. And he went to that program.
And that was, I might add, that was after he hit age 26. Yeah. And he no longer could use the insurance company.
Right.
There wasn't
cash if we did it. So anyway, the bottom line is it was after that he ended up done with the program, and he ended up in a shelter. And that shelter is where he had to do service in order for his food and his room and board. And that there was something that was very humbling about that to him. And that was when he kind of decided enough of this is going nowhere. And he had gone through his last formal rehab, had been a very, very good program. Very
and I have friends, and myself included, who, when we have kids that are struggling with mental illness and addiction, that we've gone back and forth and said, do we pay for the insurance? Do we keep the insurance? And that isn't necessarily enabling just on the surface, because sometimes there aren't programs that they can get into. I mean, Salvation Army usually, but do they have beds? Do they not have beds? Also, if they get into a medical crisis because of something, it's kind of like my friend and I say, oh, no, that's our insurance policy. It's our insurance, which means that if something happens to our kid and they need a lot of medical care, then we won't be faced with that horrible decision of, do we pay out of pocket for that good medical care, or do we have insurance? And we always say, if we can do it, having the insurance, as long as we can, is the cheaper option for our own sanity, and also for the what ifs could happen, that we're not having to make that really difficult decision. And you don't know if he would have done the same thing if you hadn't had your insurance, if he would have gone to one of those programs earlier, because addiction kind of has to run its course. I mean, you're saying he went to that program, but at the same time, he had lost multiple people that were close to him. Fiance, that is definitely can make you hit a bottom, especially when it's the second person that you were close to that has hit him. So it could have been just the convergence of all of these things that got him to the point where I am done. I can't do this anymore, which means that he got clean.
Yes, yes. He gave up the hard heroin, and I do believe it's about 5 or 6 years now is his anniversary of that significant change. And he says he has no temptation, that's not a temptation anymore at all, he says.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's fantastic if that's the case. That's not an easy drug to get over. So that's a wonderful outcome. And he is now, what about fears of relapse though? I mean, he's saying he's not tempted by that, but there's got to be something in your mind that's like.
Yeah. So somebody who has addictive personalities may have a variety of addictive issues that they face and deal with in their life. And so it's not uncommon to move from one to another or be vulnerable to that. So what we have done is we just every single day we pray for God's protection and guidance in his life and his family's life. And we acknowledge that really at this point, it is up to him what kind of a life he wants to have. And
he's still dealing with the ramifications of the years. You know what I mean? Once you give up addiction, then you have to kind of face your life, so to speak, and process through things. So there's a lot of hope now, though, and for him.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you got to, the addiction keeps you from having to face the pain of whatever your pain of your life is. And there could have been some pain from the adoption. There sometimes is, but also the pain of the choices you've made and the destruction that's kind of come along the way. Definitely doing that without using some type of substance is difficult. But AA and Narcotics Anonymous, they are wonderful programs that rehab only gets you clean and sober for a certain amount of time, and then you need support from other people that are walking the same journey with you. So there's definitely a place for him to get help if he needs that. And then I think we were talking, Edie, and you had said, I mean, he is married now with a family.
He's currently married and has 2 kids and has a great job and recently promoted, and his wife is working, and they're moving forward and making progress, and he has a wonderful personality that seems to
help him
be serving him well.
Yes.
He's a hard worker. That's something we're really grateful for. He's a very hard worker, has a strong work ethic. Some of the things that go along with that, though, are the years that you miss out on growing in your coping skills, your conflict resolution skills, some of those kind of things. If you have 6 or 8 years where you're not focused on those things, those are still things that can come up and be surprises or a challenge.
They say that an addict is as emotionally mature as they were when they started using. So if he started in junior high, then his maturity in ways is going to be back to that of somebody in junior high. And you're right, all the problem solving, the frustration tolerance, the ability to handle your emotions, identify them, all of that stuff is all something that has to be learned. But you guys have natural detachment from that now because he's in his own home, his own family, and you're not the first line of defense. Like his wife is the one that needs to deal with whatever struggles that they have. And it's not that you don't care, but it's not directly affecting you like it was when he was calling you all the time for help.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you learned a lot during that time, and the boundaries, especially. I remember many times you did eventually learn boundaries, Edie, because I do remember you giving me examples of times that you said you'd still fight within yourself, but that you were able to say no and you were able to stand firm and set some boundaries. So
I did finally have that capacity, but boy, that was the hardest thing for me, for sure.
yeah, well, I think it's hard for when they pull your heartstrings, and especially moms being nurturing, and it's difficult to say no and let them struggle, but they really don't grow until they have to do it on their own. But I know you talked a little bit about your daughter and that she felt neglected while all of this was going on with him because she was in high school. She was younger than him and in high school also. And she had quite a bit of resentment towards him, right? That took a while for them to work out.
She felt not seen because our resources, emotional, physical, and financial at times, were being consumed with trying to save our son. And that's not to fully neglect her by any means, because I was very sensitive about that also for her needs. But she had to hear and watch the conflict that would happen in the home. And then she would want to go to her room and feel like she's forced in there by virtue of just protecting herself from the chaos at times. She was very troubled and hurt by the pain she saw that we experienced through this. And so she definitely became very resentful of her brother and really carried that for a very long time. It was only about 2 years ago or a year and a half ago that our son was in the area for about a year, and they had opportunity to work through some of that, and that was a beautiful opportunity where they actually started to have time together once a week to just hang out. But for her, the jury's out all the time. I mean, she's very protective still, but she wants to have a close relationship, closer than it is, would make her happier.
Yeah. And you guys still have an open relationship with him. He calls you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He loves us dearly. He is ever so thankful for how we've stood there through thick and thin. We're planning a summer vacation in June and to visit for 2 weeks when the baby arrived. And so we're very much a part of supporting their life.
Wonderful. So what would you like to say to listeners who have children using drugs to give them hope, but also advice on how to respond?
Really, we've talked about this all along the way, but until the addict is ready to quit, there's really not a whole lot that you can do as a parent other than just walk the journey and learn how to deal with your own issues and kind of stay in your own lane, so to speak, through the process, setting up boundaries and that sort of thing. So it's very important to realize that you can't control a person and tell them to stop using until they're ready to do that. I think the other thing is get involved with support groups. There's a lot of support out there that we have access to. Attend your classes, attend an Ar-Non or Al-Anon or whatever is the best fit. I think also prayer, our faith was, I don't know how people do it without faith to be able to survive and know that God will work all things out for our good in the end, that he cares about us and loves us. And I think those are several things. I think you may want to mention that. I guess the last thing is that as long as our children or our loved one or whoever we're talking about is still alive, there's hope for them, and that's critical. We need to have hope.
Yeah.
And I would add, there are a lot of slogans you learn in Naranon and when you're trying to grow in your understanding of addiction and difficult relationships. And the 3 C's was really helpful. I had to remind myself that often, which say that I didn't cause it, I can't control it, and I can't cure it. So I myself, Edie, cannot do all those things for someone else.
Yeah.
We had to remind ourselves that often, one day at a time. I say that to my son, and he says, I hate that. And I said, but the truth is, I love it because to me, I do believe with God's help, I can get through one day at a time. And sometimes that's all I need to get through. And so in that, believe that God will give you what you need to get through at least one day.
Yes.
Letting go and let God. That letting go was probably the hardest thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's taken this many years for me to understand that better, such that now I'm realizing that if I don't ask so many questions, I don't need to deal with somebody else's issues. So
You don't want to know
care of
everything.
mine. Right.
Yeah.
I don't need to know everything because then I don't have to worry about everything. And I'm no longer responsible for any of his world. He's an adult now and so on. It's not that I don't care because I care deeply, but we're separate people, separate. I'm learning that is actually healthy to allow your loved one to take responsibility for how they live their life.
Yes, absolutely. Healthy and absolutely necessary. And if we do take responsibility for our children's lives, they're not going to take responsibility for their own lives. And it's at some point it's going to fall apart and they're going to have to learn how to do it. So it's just a question of, like you said, when do we want to let go and let God? And that's really pivotal. But I like the idea of leaving people with the thought that you said, Greg, which is as long as your loved one is alive, there is still hope. And I don't mean the hope where every morning you get up and you're anxious all day long thinking, is today the day? But because then that will get you back into that constant panic and fear. But just being able to turn that person over to God and saying, God, I know you can do it. I can't cure it. I can't cure it. I cannot control it, but God, you take it. And with God's help, in that person's life, there is hope.
Yes.
Definitely.
And could I add, I mean, I think Greg said it, but this is not a journey you can do alone at all.
No.
So I just highly encourage anybody that's in this struggle to make sure you find people or organizations or resources to Carla's classes to participate in, because it's through that you can grow and remember that you're ultimately going to be responsible for what you do with your life. I faced that at one time when I realized I was going to face my life before God one day, and he was going to say, what did you do with your life? And I thought at the moment I would have to say, I'm so wounded and I'm in so much pain. I really didn't do a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a turning point for me to realize that I needed to pay attention to my life, even while my son wasn't doing a very good job of paying attention to his life.
Yeah, definitely.
And being destructive.
Well, thank you both very much for sharing your story. And in the 12-step programs, we say your story of your experience, strength, and hope, leaving off with that word hope. So, and your son's story is hopeful. As many times as he moved, as many years with heavy drugs of heroin, and literally getting to the point where he's now clean for so long and in a family is definitely a story of hope. So thank you again for sharing it.
You're welcome.
So I'd like to thank you for listening to this podcast on Change My Relationship. And if you know somebody that would benefit from this, please share this podcast with them. And I'll look forward to being with you the next time. God bless.
Thank you for listening to Change My Relationship. We hope you will subscribe to these podcasts and share them with your friends. Carla would love to hear from you. She welcomes ideas for future podcasts as well as your feedback on how the podcast have helped your life and relationships. You can email her at carla@changemyrelationship.com. For more information on Change My Relationship and Carla Downing's ministry, including her books, studies, devotionals, podcast, and YouTube videos, visit changemyrelationship.com.